Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Okay, so presidents have been sports fans before. Even Clinton was a basketball fan. What makes Obama's relationship to basketball so special?
Well, in office, he's continued to play the game. It's a vigorous game. He's played it at a pretty high level until he took an elbow to the lip back in 2010 and needed 12 stitches. But I think the interesting part of his relationship with the game happened long before he took the oath of office. When he's a 10-year-old kid living in Hawaii, his dad has essentially abandoned him. The last memory he has of his dad is this Christmas where he gave him a basketball as a gift. And he's kind of marooned out there trying to work out his identity. Not many African-American, certainly men, out there at that time.
In Hawaii, where he was growing up? Yeah.
Correct, yeah. So it's a way that he's kind of – his biographer, David Marinas, had a wonderful line where he said, basketball connected the disconnected parts of him. And I think you see that as he works his way through law school. He goes to Chicago. He starts putting together this personal and even professional network of people. He even wins his bride. He impresses Michelle by going out and playing pickup ball with Michelle's brother, Craig Robinson.
So basketball features prominently in his personal story, more than his presidential story, you think?
Well, it does there, but then to me it's uncanny. Basketball is this game where you have to strike this perfect balance between the individual and a kind of collective. And when you read Obama's writings about government and his political philosophy, he almost describes the game when he says that the American challenge has always been finding that unity where we're this country of hardy individualists.
Mm-hmm. So, resolving that tension somehow between the individual and the common concerns.
Yeah, and the Bulls that he loved so much, the Chicago Bulls of the 90s and Michael Jordan, what a great example. They weren't a championship team when it was all about this one player, but even Jordan was shrewd enough to figure out that you put the right pieces around him and then they would get this chemistry. And I think that's the thing. While the U.S. is going through this really ugly primary season right now to find a next president, we're beginning to see this first wave of nostalgia for the guy who's going to be leaving office because he had this kind of level, moderate way of looking at the world.
So basketball reflects his personal philosophy, his sort of legal philosophies as well, political philosophies. Let's go back, though, to how basketball fits into his personal story. You talked about his father giving him basketball at the age of 10. When did Barack Obama himself put it together that basketball was central to his identity?
His grandfather, he was really raised by his grandparents, took him to a University of Hawaii game, but in 1972, I'm guessing, early in that year. And they had this wonderful team, 5 black starters, top 20 team, and it was a big deal in the islands. And he's written movingly in his memoir, Dreams from My Father, about the effect that had on him. But then he goes to the playground to kind of learn the game. His dad's not around. He's self-taught. He's learning it in the streets. And then he tries out for his high school team, and he makes a team because he's got this love for the game the coach recognizes, but he doesn't really get off the bench. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the beginning to understanding why the game has abided with him, because there was this unrequited relationship with it. And I'm sure there are plenty of people listening who have that. You played it, you can't get it out of your system, and it's this dream you're chasing well into your middle age.
How does that high school coach feel about benching the president of the United States?
I talked to him for the book.
Okay.
A guy's name is Chris McLaughlin. He's now retired, but he was a very young coach at the time, and he says he has kind of agonized. Boy, where did I go wrong? And he says that he was immature as a coach, and that he just out of insecurity, he didn't really go to his bench earlier in a game. And he said that, today if he were coaching, he would find a place for somebody who loved the game that much.
You talked about basketball reflecting his philosophy, his political philosophy. It reflected another side of him as well in terms of his style of play.
Yeah, I think that's a fair observation. He has, there's all this, at the margins of the U.S. political life, there are all these caricatures about who he is. But in fact, if you watch him play, you're looking at a guy who's steady, even-tempered. Mm-hmm. In fact, one person told me he's a guy who knows how to play with people who are better than he is. And when you think of what we want out of a president, you want to have somebody who's surrounded by people who are experts, but then can kind of synthesize and see the bigger picture. And a great parlor game as I was working on this. I'd ask people, well, who does he resemble? Who's the NBA player, current or former, that he most resembles? And the one that I really liked was Lenny Wilkens, literally a player coach, left-handed, not a great leaper, and that's pretty well established. The guy doesn't have much air to get, but ever. He dunked maybe twice when he was 16, apparently. But I like the Lenny Wilkens analogy because there's a kind of steady hand.
So you actually dug in and got a sense of Obama's playing ability.
I did. I had to reconstruct it by talking to people, but there is on YouTube. It's called the Barack Obama mixtape, and there's some footage from the Hawaii State High School Championship game where he got garbage time. He makes a layup, misses a free throw, and you can see the comfort. You can tell that he learned the game on the street.
Okay, so there's teamwork. There's knowing how to play with players who are better than you and how to synthesize and being a sort of player coach. You talked about him working out aspects of his identity through basketball, his black identity.
Yeah,
talk about that.
There's no question about it. And if you read his memoir, he gets very close to the bone talking about the ambivalence he felt about that, because very quickly he realized that basketball is kind of this false thing out there for so many young black men. And I find it so interesting that even in the White House today, he has his My Brother's Keeper initiative where he's trying to connect with urban young men of color. And I'm guessing that basketball is this really powerful thing. He can say, look, it was almost like the misspent youth I had in the pool hall, but there came a point where I had to choose. I had to be serious, but I was still able to take this game with me. And even today, he helps coach his daughter's youth league team. So in a way, that's full circle, because here was a guy abandoned by his dad, but through basketball, he's discharging his paternal duties on a very high level.
How does basketball play into Obama's cool?
I think in his movement, just when he's mounting a stage or a dais, or he's getting out of an airliner, you see that. But more than anything, I think it's kind of the cultural resonances. We're in a digital era that he and his White House have been pretty good at adapting to. But basketball has been a way to kind of make Kobe Bryant and LeBron James his deputies. I mean, that's where you've seen some of the political activism kindle, because a lot of these guys helped with a campaign in 2008 that got excited about it, and there's been this momentum that's kept them weighing in things, not because the White House is directing them to, but there's a very organic, natural way they're stepping
some
up.
Cultural capital there that comes with the game. It also won him his wife to some extent.
Yep, that's right. His wife's brother was drafted by the Sixers, and a lot of her pet projects, things like nutrition and fitness, fit in very natural with the goals of NBA players, the NBA Cares charities, and so forth. So there is kind of a holistic thing. To me, though, the most interesting thing has been to see some of these social concerns emerge in American culture, and the White House will say something, and it's almost a call and response thing that you'll hear in NBA locker rooms, something, not always the same thing, but something that advances.
Do you have an example of that?
Well, one of the best examples is the Trayvon Martin incident, where this young man out in a Florida town, actually at halftime of the NBA All-Star game, so we're on an anniversary right this weekend. He's out taking a break in his neighborhood, and a neighborhood watch guy shoots him, and the entire Miami Heat team, LeBron James, tweets out pictures of themselves in hoodies, and this was shortly after Obama himself makes a comment, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin. So there's no coordination going on, but there is a kind of telepathic relationship, I think, between the White House and the NBA locker room.
What about Obama's political platform as far as raising taxes on the rich? How does that affect his cultural capital with the wealthy NBA players?
Well, strangely enough, almost without exception, the players are saying, hey, tax me. I'm lucky. Ray Allen made a really interesting observation, which was NBA players are so wealthy now that we feel obligated to set up a foundation and to give of our time and our money. And I think Obama, again, generationally, he's tapping into a millennial generation where this stuff is important. There was a time in the 90s when the movie Jerry Maguire was popular, when Michael Jordan all but said, hey, I'm not going to jeopardize one sneaker sale by going out on a limb and adopting some political cause. And I think generationally, with the Obama election in 2008, we're just at an entirely different place. And when he leaves office, I think that momentum is going to carry on.
And I think we saw that as well. Was it LeBron James that wore the "I Can't Breathe" T-shirt in protest of the death of Eric Garner?
It was Derrick Rose, actually.
Derrick Rose.
And in many ways, it's more meaningful that it was Derrick Rose because Derrick Rose is not an outspoken guy. He's one of the quietest stars in the league. And very naturally, he's sitting with some friends in his apartment in downtown Chicago, and out the window, he hears a demonstration about Eric Garner's death. And it was entirely his idea. Yeah, Jay-Z helped implement it in the Barclays Center in Brooklyn and got the T-shirt smuggled in so he could wear it during warm-ups. But it was Derrick Rose's idea. And I think, to me, that was a kind of tipping point. It wasn't just the outspoken people who are saying, hey, I want to take a stand. It's the Derrick Roses of the league.
And did Obama endorse that?
You know, he has in a general way.
Okay.
He said, gee, it's great to see athletes who are seeing a wider world. It's great to realize that there's another generation in the footsteps of Billie Jean King and Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And, gee, that's pretty good company to be in.
Mm-hmm. So there's this sort of, not direct endorsement, but, again, this call and response going on with the NBA.
Yeah, and even a few weeks ago, Obama has an event in the White House about gun violence. There in the front row are two Washington Wizards players. Not stars, but just two guys from the local NBA team who'd grown up in these neighborhoods that are being wrenched apart by gun violence. And that, to me, is just another example.
So basketball factored heavily into Obama's life, but he was reluctant to make it a part of his campaign initially. Is that right? In 2007, 2008?
Initially, there was wariness on the part of his political advisors that if basketball were a centerpiece, that it would play into a stereotype that white voters may have about a black man. So they were very careful. They rolled it out in New Hampshire, but only after already getting, basic biography, get him into more ordinary political contexts. And then when they did roll it out, it was on this kind of retail basis where he's playing with patrolmen and firefighters in small groups. And the thing that I found so much fun is I spoke to one guy who worked on that New Hampshire campaign who'd also worked on Bill Bradley's campaign about 12, 15 years earlier. He'd been an NBA Hall of Famer. And he said, oh, yeah, the staff, we wanted to play back then just like we wanted to play on the Obama campaign, but we could never get Bradley to play with us because, again, it's that unrequited relationship with the game. Whereas Bradley had done everything, literally everything, Olympic gold medal, all of it. Obama had so much more to get out of the game, so he didn't have to have his arm twisted.
Do you think we'll see another politician use basketball the way Obama has?
I think we'll see sports more and more as a way that politicians will bond with the ordinary American, certainly. I don't know what to expect going forward, although I did notice that Bernie Sanders was shooting hoops the day of the New Hampshire primary while he was waiting for the returns to come in.
What do you think all of this says about basketball in its place in popular culture as a sport?
I think it is the game of the Obama coalition. I think generationally, look, the Spurs and the Heat, really successful teams in heavily Hispanic areas. The Warriors actually market to Asian Americans and gay Americans. This is a quick-cutting, digitally friendly game. There are, 120, 130 international players in this American-based league this season. So I think that this is the game of the future. Yes, soccer will always have an establishment and a relationship with the international sports fan that in some way, but this is a kind of generational wave.
I think especially with what's going on in football and in hockey in terms of injuries, those sports may be on the decline.
Yeah, and even youth soccer, there's a little bit of concern about concussions. Mm-hmm. I mean, not that basketball at the highest level isn't dangerous, and of course the president with his 12 stitches knows. But it's interesting you say that, Shad, because it was actually his healthcare initiative where he trotted out basketball as a way to get people, and again, the Obama coalition are the very people they needed to sign up on the healthcare exchanges to get them to take it seriously. And the president talked about his own ankle sprains and how much money it cost in the emergency room. Get covered. It's the smart thing. He did PSAs. He got Alonzo Mourning and Grant Hill to do PSAs for him too. And I make the case in the book that basketball helped save healthcare reform.
I like that. And I love the photos in this book as well.
Well, the photos, most of the most of them, and certainly the best ones, are from Pete Souza, who's the official White House photographer, who has this unparalleled access. And I'm not sure Pete, from talking to him, was aware of how many basketball pictures were kind of piling up over the course of 7 years. But he showed the book to the president, and they both said, yeah, wow, I guess there was a lot of basketball around for these 7 years in the White House. But it actually shows, I think, the kind of youth and vigor. Here's a guy with a young family, playing with his daughters, just reacting naturally with NBA stars. He wasn't an old fogey. He was a young guy with a kind of old soul in the Oval Office, for at least for these 7 years.
Thanks so much for your time, Alex.
Thank you, Shad. I really appreciate it.